Hello, everybody. We are going to be working on Unit 3 today. We did get a little bit of a preview of this during last week's class. The main thing that we're going to focus on today is how to include CSS with your HTML and have them talk to each other and create an effect or basically styles as a result of it. Before we dig into material, though, I know that I've had a number of questions from people regarding FTP, how it works, why it's not working for them, what challenges or issues that you guys might be having. And I'm going to speculate that at least a couple of you here are having some issues with it. I know that one of you came forward and actually mentioned that. So I do want to do some clarification on how you should be working with FTP. I'll do a little bit of demo and then I'll open it up for questions, or let's talk about whatever problems or issues that you're having with it. And please don't be embarrassed to share what those issues are, because we can fix them. That's kind of the more important part. Once you see how it works and understand it a little bit better, it really makes everything go better in what we're doing here in class. Up until this point, I have not had a requirement really that you must turn in your stuff by submitting a link. But as we move past Unit 3, that will be the way you're turning in your homework, is to turn in a link, not to turn in necessarily other formats or whatever. So I'm going to show you what I think is correct and how I will grade you, and then you guys can get maybe some clarity as to what you're doing on things. So let's first do this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up my coding tools. So I just want to have all my tools handy. I have been using Visual Studio Code this semester, which is kind of new for me in terms of like actually running the whole class through on this piece of software. Normally I would use Notepad++ for this class and then eventually switch over to Dreamweaver at some point. I do like to demonstrate other tools, but Visual Studio Code is the tool for this semester. And I know that many of you are following along using the same tool. Now, going back to file and folder management, I am pulling up a file explorer here in Windows 11 that I've just put up on my screen. And I'm going to go to the location where I store my work for this class, which may be different than where you're storing your work for this class. And I just want to do this because if you're struggling at all with FTP, I'm going to speculate that you're probably struggling with local file management at the same time. Because why do I talk about like file management in an introductory IT class? Well, a lot of people come in, we're like, hey man, I know how to organize my folders and files. I've been doing it since I was a kid, that kind of approach. And I would hope that's you, right? And maybe you have a really good system for organizing your stuff. Ultimately, what makes a whole lot of sense for managing your folders and files when you're putting stuff on a web server is to have an identical copy of those files on your local file system before you upload them to the remote server. You don't want to just be willy-nilly placing your stuff anywhere on your hard drive and then trying to figure out where it is and then try to get it to the right spot on Prometheus. All right, so what I want you guys to notice here is that the way that I organize my stuff, all right, so I'm talking about local files, but technically they're on my Google Drive. So I don't know if you can see that up here in the address bar, but I have the Google Drive file stream software installed that attaches to my Google account here at Gateway, creates a pseudo drive letter of drive G on my computer here, and then I can access it like I would any other file or folder on my computer system. But in reality, what's happening, this stuff is uploading to the cloud. So it's out on Google Drive somewhere, but it looks like it's on my own machine. For you, you may have chosen to put stuff in your documents folder. That's fine, right? Your documents folder on Windows 11 and Windows 10, typically on a consumer machine, will automatically upload to OneDrive. And you may be configured that way. I will let you know that I don't configure my machine that way. So when I put stuff in my documents folder here, it doesn't go to OneDrive automatically. I don't like that, okay? But most of your machines, you'll notice if you do click on the documents folder and then click up here in the address bar, it will often say, C, users, your username, OneDrive, whatever, and then that automatically syncs out to the cloud. That might actually be the best choice for you, right? If you do prefer to put your stuff on Google Drive and run Google Drive file stream, that's fine. If you choose to do neither, that's fine. It doesn't really matter where you put your stuff, as long as you know where it is, where to find it, and that it's neatly organized. I had given you the tip early on, in my documents folder, I create a gateway folder, then a web programming folder, then unit folders, and then most of those unit folders have two folders, one for the case study and one for the project, and then those replicate every week going forward, right? So that's what I recommended to you early on. What I do in a practical sense is, because I put more than one class's worth of stuff on Prometheus, I want you to listen to that carefully. Right now we have one class, but in the future you will have others. Like next semester, you'll probably take JavaScript or PHP, which will also go on Prometheus. So it makes a whole lot of sense now to arrange your folders so that Prometheus would have all the folders for all your different classes. So you'll see, for me, I'm teaching web programming in the fall of 23. So I name my folder inside of Prometheus WebProg or WebProg or whatever you want to call it, FA23. That's kind of my nomenclature for naming it and giving it a different semester, So for you, maybe it's just web programming that you'll have a folder, right? And you probably already have that folder. When I go into that folder, I then see my Unit 2 work, right? And then you'll notice I have my project work. I don't have a case study in there personally, because I didn't work on the case study. That's your work, not my work, right? But normally what would happen here is I would have a project and then maybe Java Jam or Fish Creek or Path of Light or Pacific Trails, whichever case study you chose to do, right? Now, when I do bring up FileZilla, we'll come back to this here in just a second, but I'm going to actually take us back to the course shelf for a second and just remind you, if you haven't FTP'd yet, your username and password for FTP are in your grade book. So you click My Grades in the left sidebar, right? If your sidebar has disappeared, you get this like weird tool here where you can expand it and contract it. If you're on a big wide screen, it should just pop up. If you're on a smaller screen, it might obscure. So just be aware that you can pull that over. Click on your My Grades, and then right here will be your username and password. And I realize this is all repeat, but you know what? Some people miss it for whatever reason, or they wait, or whatever. This is just reinforcement. So think of it as that, right? You'll see here basically your username, which typically is your first initial and last name, or some variation of that if there's other people with the same combo, usually pretty rare on our system. And then a slash, and then some numbers, which happen to be your student ID number. So your username is typically first initial, last name, all lowercase, no capitals in there, right? And then your password is usually your student ID number. If you're not comfortable with that combination, we can always adjust those things, but you need to email me to set them. If you knew how to do SSH and had permission to do so, you could manually change it, but we don't give people access at that level, at least not yet in the course. All right, so remember, username, all lowercase, password, also case sensitive. It should be all numbers at this point. When you come back over to FileZilla, you want to type in the name of the server. So it's Prometheus, is Prometheus, just like the Greek god. If you're not sure, you can find that information in the course shell, but all lowercase, once again. You do not need to put in front of it HTTP or FTP. You don't have to put anything in front of it, just the name, prometheus.gtc.edu, all lowercase. Your username, for me, I'm using my C account, which is 5 C's. Yep, I do remember that one though. So I have a few different, what I call utility accounts for teaching, and that's one of them. That's my C account. And then my password, which is case sensitive. And for me, it's a little bit more complex than the ones that you have. But either way, once you have that typed in, you just click quick connect, and it should connect just that quickly. Maybe a slight delay if you're at home, right? If you get a message up on your screen that says, hey, this is not a secure connection, are you sure you want to continue connecting? Then there's a little checkbox that says allow insecure FTP. You want to check that box because we do run FTP unsecured. Now, what I mean by unsecured is the traffic is not encrypted, meaning your traffic in transit can be intercepted by hackers who are smart enough to find it. All right, so why don't we secure it? Well, let's think about the kind of stuff we're uploading here. Who cares about like case studies from a book or homework from Gateway? There's no financial information in there. There's no software to steal. There's no personal information, hopefully, to steal. So we find it a barrier to run the secure version, at least at this level. It is important to note when you do start doing FTP professionally, like if you were, let's say you got yourself a hosting account somewhere and had a real live website and you wanted to FTP to it, they would have very strict rules about passwords. They would have very strict rules about using SFTP, which is secure FTP. And then that would run either through SSL or TLS or a combination. But they get really finicky about that because they don't want their servers to get compromised. Here, what are they going to compromise? Even if they get in, there's nothing really to steal, right? It also makes it a lot more difficult for us to teach how to connect when it's set up that way. This is one of the few services that is, operating in what we'll call insecure mode, but I assure you that as long as you stick with the common sense practices, don't share your username and password with others, you should be fine here in terms of security. Once you do get connected to the server, you will see this kind of a dual screen layout here. And just to kind of realign it and show you what these panels are all about, the top panel here is for system messages. This actually shows what's happening as you're connecting to the server. It's a response from the server on a command line level. We'll call this the console, because that's really what it is. This is where the server sends you messages. So sometimes if there's a successful upload or a failure in a download or a failure connecting, you'll see a message up in that panel. When you're transferring a whole bunch of files at once, that console up at the top will look like a hacker screen from a movie. It'll just like have all this stuff flying through it. So for every little file that's uploaded or downloaded or any maneuver that you make on the server is recorded there in that panel. At the very bottom, the wide screen at the bottom, when you do initiate a transfer of some sort, whether it's downloading it from the server or uploading it to the server, the stuff will list in this panel and show you what's being transferred, what is yet to transfer, and if it succeeded or not, right? So that's a pretty helpful panel too. The four main panels on the screen are split into two. The two on the left are the local file system, whatever's on your computer or whatever your computer is connected to, is maybe a better way to say it. On the remote side, and you'll see local site, right up here, remote site is the folder listing and file listing for your account on Prometheus. When you first connect here, all you see is a blank folder here and a blank folder here. Just please keep in mind though that the top one holds the folder structure, it just shows folders. The bottom window shows you what's inside those folders, right? So like right now at the top, I'm clicked on the root. So when you see that / by the way, that's or Linux or Unix way to say this is your root folder. This is the bottom of your account. You can't go anywhere above it. And then down here, you'll see whatever is inside there. You will notice, right? So for all the folders that I have listed in the top, they also appear here because right now I've highlighted the root folder, right? And it shows me everything inside, which is a bunch of other folders and a few files, right? Now, because I'm doing all my work for this class in a unique folder that I created, Web Programming Fall 23, And then if I go into that folder, you'll notice that I do have a Unit 2 folder, and inside that folder, I have my Java Jam and my project. Ideally, I'll have the exact same structure over on my local side. Okay, so you may or may not have that, but here's where your kind of like leap of confidence comes in a way, right? Whatever you're putting in your web programming folder is going to be a mix of things. Most of the time it will be HTML files, CSS files, maybe some images and videos and JavaScript, you know, a little bit. You might also be creating zip files and documents, right? Now, the big mistake that I've seen a number of people make, so I got an email actually over the weekend from one of my students who's in the online section. He's actually an experienced coder, which is why it kind of surprised me a little bit. But he sent me a screenshot that he uploaded his stuff over to Prometheus, and what I saw inside of his folder was zip files. So like when I looked over here, what I saw was zip files. Okay, so here's kind of the situation with that. Yes, you can upload zip files to Prometheus. In fact, if you look in the root of mine, I have, well, this is technically a zip file, but it's in the Unix format. But you can upload zip files to the server. However, right, big however, a zip file is not a web page. A zip file is a compressed file that contains other files, right? When I ask you guys in the assignments, so when I come back here, let's say to Unit 2 HTML Basics, I will suggest to you right here, I say, as a backup, you can also zip the entire folder that contains your work, right? This should be a folder and 2 files, or you can just zip the 2 files, either way. And then you upload the zip to Blackboard, not Prometheus. You guys catching that? Right? Not that you couldn't upload the zip to Prometheus, but when you put a zip on Prometheus and try to look at it, right? Even if you use the zip file name, all that will happen is the zip will download to your computer. You cannot see the web pages. So what you should be uploading to Prometheus is the folder and file structure, the folders and files themselves directly to Prometheus, because that's what will show up as a web page. Okay, so if you're uploading zips to the server, not a big deal, doesn't break anything. You don't need to do it, is kind of what I'm telling you. If you just upload a zip and expect your web page to appear, well, guess what? That's why it's not appearing, is because zip files do not render in the browser as a page, right? If you instead are uploading just the plain files and folders, those will appear as a page. Even something as rudimentary as a text file will appear. So that's kind of interesting. All right, so if that's the case, how would I take my project from Unit 2? So if you look here in my file folder, and I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. So I have my C account, which is hopefully all the same folders that I have up on Prometheus. There's a couple of differences you guys probably notice because I experiment with some software on there, but basically these are my core files for Prometheus. I created a folder for this class called Web Programming Fall 23. Yours might just be called Web Programming or Web Prog or Web or whatever. And then inside that folder is my work for this semester. So far, just Unit 2. So far, really just the project, right? That project, by the way, if I open it up, you notice I do have a zip in here, right? I'm not gonna upload that to Prometheus, but I would upload that as a student to Blackboard. Why? Because if your link doesn't work on Prometheus, then I have a zip I can grade and I can still grade your work. It also creates a backup for you. So if you, so think about this, somebody steals your laptop, or asteroid falls from the sky and blows us all up or something, right? And that laptop's gone. It's still on Blackboard. Yes, Keon.
So I was playing around with Prometheus, like talking to. Well, I have to make 2 separate folders and upload one on Prometheus and the other and and keep going on my device.
Okay, so Keon's question is basically, do I need to keep two separate folders then? Okay, so if the question is, keep one on your local computer and you keep one on Prometheus.
That's what I did.
You do all your work on your computer, and then when it's ready, you upload it to Prometheus and replace whatever's there if it's not right. If you're doing a new chapter, then you put it in a new folder. Right, I'll show you this whole procedure. That's exactly what we're doing here.
Okay.
All right, so I found my stuff on my local drive and I'm just checking it. And if you guys remember, this is what it looked like. Nothing fancy at this point, but we're gonna start adding CSS, so it'll start looking cooler in just a second. So when I connect it up here, so these two panels, right, that we have here are basically the stuff on Prometheus. I need to find the same stuff on my local drive, and for me it's in my G drive, so I have to go up on the upper panel on the left hand side. I then find my G drive, I then go to my drive, and then I always hate the way they organize this here we go, that's better. And then I'm looking for my utility accounts on Prometheus. And then I go to my C account, which is maybe the equivalent of your gateway folder. I find the current class, web programming, fall 23. So you see how my folder structure here mimics the one here. The only difference are these two Drupal folders, but that's kind of an experiment that we've been doing here on campus. Nothing you should worry about. So you could kind of like just ignore those two. But you notice all the other stuff here is basically on both sides, with an exception or two. When I'm in that folder, I then see that I have my Unit 2 folder, and so I want to be in the same spot on the other side. If I didn't have this folder here, let's say all your stuff is in the root, right? What you might want to do is scroll down to the bottom of the screen here, so you're in a blank area, right-click, create directory, you know, and make a directory. And I'm like kind of being a little silly here, but name it whatever is appropriate. If you're doing it for this class, it should maybe be called web programming or web prog or something equivalent, right? And so that's how you make a directory. And that process is completely doable that way. So you can manually create all the folders on the right side if you want. What might be easier for some of you is if you have a whole folder with your web stuff, you could hypothetically, you know, go up one level, take that whole folder and drag it over, you know, and I would do it like this. Now, I'm not going to do that in principle here because I already have this folder and it would overwrite everything. It doesn't make sense for me to do it, right? But if you're trying to upload files, I want you to watch what I'm doing right now. You see, I've like pre-created all these unit folders. Wasn't really a wise idea because they're all empty, right? But I'm going to go ahead and delete those, at least for the moment, because I don't need them. Now, notice the console showing all the deletes. And now the folders are seemingly identical, right? Not exactly. Well, you guys should have a Java Jam or a Fish Creek or whatever, your case study folder in each folder. I'm not, because I don't do that homework. You guys do. And here's an example of a zip sitting there, but the zip doesn't need to be there either, right? I'm actually going to remove that from mine because it just wastes disk space. If yours is there, whatever, but that doesn't make your page show. Since I do have a project folder here and a project folder there, what I really want is these two to line up. And ideally, when I move them over, they'll be identical. Now, I'm not sure if the version on the server is identical to the version I have, and I'm going to guess it probably isn't because I probably did edit since I did the upload. So if you already have file existing here, what you might think about doing is like, well, I'll delete those and then upload the new ones, right? So you could do it that way. So you could, for example, right-click delete and then re-upload. Or you can take your two files, I'm assuming the ones locally are complete and done, and I highlight them both and then drag and drop them over. And as I do that, FileZilla recognizes, hey, those are already there. Do you want me to overwrite? And then it'll go file by file. First the about page, I'm gonna say, sure, go ahead. Then the index page, then I'm gonna say, okay, sure. If you want, if you were doing this with 100 files, by the way, you could just click the little box that says always use this action and maybe apply to the current queue only, which means the current files you're uploading, and then say okay, and then it won't do it every time. I'm kind of a little cautious about saying always overwrite because sometimes I've lost work that way. But in this case, I now have the more recent versions. How do I know they're more recent? Well, I look at the date here and notice it says last modified, and it points to October 2nd at noon, which is now, right? So they just got uploaded. Now the job becomes to go find them in your browser. And people are struggling with this piece too. When we did our simple FTP upload, and I'm going to show you this, right? Your simple FTP upload, we created a page called index. We dropped it in the root. And basically the way that you would access it is prometheus.gtc.edu, a / a tilde, the sideways squiggle, right? And then your username and a /. And that would automatically bring up your index page on Prometheus in the root of your account. Now you'll notice my index page in the root of my account on Prometheus happens to be the solutions page and examples page for all the stuff we're doing in the course. I just put it in the chat. You guys should bookmark that. Okay, so why? Because this is where I put all the answers. Right, so when you're doing a case study and then you want to see how it was done correctly, you just go here, go to Unit 2, find your Java Jam, Fish Creek, Patholight, Pacific Trails, whatever, click through and see what it looks like. Then you can right click and view source, compare the code to your own. Right? If you missed that part, you can rewind the video and watch it again. But I'm gonna tell you that when I'm grading your work and your work's not quite right for case studies, I'll usually give you the author's link and say, go look at the author's work, right click, view source, check out their code, compare it to your own, fix it, and then re-upload it, right? So that's one reason why that's important. Now, for the examples that I do, and you'll notice here that I have them kind of dating back a little bit for all the different Unit 2 HTML basics that I did, and I'm going to have to add a link to this page ultimately, but what I'm doing in this class will be added here so you guys can look at my code directly that I'm doing in these examples this semester. But all the case studies are listed unit by unit, right? And you'll see them, there's 3 columns of them. And then when we start using graphics, images, and videos and stuff like that, all of that can be found here in these zip files, which you download, unzip, and then open. You can't see them directly. All right, and I hope I'm getting through on that point. Now, when it comes to finding the actual homework that you uploaded, and you are using a folder structure, however it is that you got to that folder. So for me, I went to the root, I went to web programming fall 23. So I uploaded my stuff to the wrong place, by the way, which is horrible, which means I just blew away a previous semester's work. All right. That was not intentional, by the way. So it just shows you that it's easy to make a mistake doing that. Now I have a safe copy here, so I should probably, I'm trying to be like mindful of the fact that people will look at those files at some point. So I'm going to fix those really quick. So watch how I'm fixing this and how the fact that I have my stuff organized nicely. So web programming spring 23, I just overwrote those files accidentally. How do I know that? Because when I look here and here, I see the timestamp. But thankfully, I have the exact copy on my local side. This is actually a great example. Me screwing up shows you why organizing your files is so important, because I can rescue it now. I just, if you think about this, if this is a live website that was making you money and I just uploaded the wrong stuff and blew the whole thing away, I'm recovering from that right now. I have it in the same folder in the same spot, web programming spring 23 project in unit 2. Spring 23 Unit 2 project. I'm going to take these two files, which were done back in February of 23, and I'm moving them over and replacing both of these. And yes, now they have a more recent timestamp, but now they're the correct files. All right. But I now want to switch back over and focus on this folder, which is for this semester, Unit 2 on both sides. And you see how I'm changing the same thing on both sides. Go to the project folder inside Unit 2 on both sides. And then I want these two files to move over. Another tip, by the way, when you're moving stuff over and you want to do more than one, you can click on the first, hold down Shift, and then click on the last, or hold down the Control key, and then you can select multiple items. But as I move this over and release and do an overwrite, and you notice how the date's updated again, another double check that they're the right file is the file size. So here, this is 798, 3646, 3646. One tip that it maybe was not the right file to begin with here is notice how those numbers are different. This is from the spring folder. I didn't notice it and accidentally overwrote my stuff because I was not following my own darn rules, right? But thankfully, by keeping an identical copy on both sides with the same file and folder structure, you are now ready to succeed and not overwrite the stuff that you don't want to overwrite. This does take a little bit of practice. It takes a little bit of diligence and consistency. Some of you might already have, file system approaches that you use personally to keep track of your games or your documents or whatever it is that you put on your computer. But when you do web work, if you guys aren't feeling this yet, this stuff is just so important. This is why I keep going back to it all the time. This is why we have an assignment about file management. If you're not getting this, if you're not getting the folder and file management, man, you are just going to struggle with web stuff all the time, right? So whatever it takes to improve these skills, do it. If you look back at, I think, Unit 1 or 0, we have like a little thing that pops you out to some videos that show you how to manage your files and folders. It is a very personal thing, right? But when it comes to putting it out on a web server, there's some really basic principles you can follow to make sure stuff does not get screwed up. For me, probably the biggest tip is whatever you're doing on your local side, do the exact same thing on the remote side. Another thing that I have seen from a few people is when they're naming their folders and their files, they're putting spaces in their folder or file names. Please do not do that. What'll happen in your address bar is those spaces will turn into %20. So the 3 characters replacing a space, right? And you might see that in your addresses. I have actually a couple examples from students, but I really don't want to call them out and put them up on the screen. But when you look at those, in the URL, it's not that they don't work. So here's kind of the catch, right? So I could create folders and files with spaces in them, and on Prometheus, they work. Okay, here's the why. We set up Prometheus to allow for it because we know students will make mistakes, but they still want to get their homework in. And then we'll just kind of say, hey, try not to put spaces in your file names. So on our server, it works, but you move it to a commercial server, some commercial servers disallow it because spaces break apps and file names. When you're doing a basic web page, not a big deal. When you have your web page behaving like an application, right? It's driving back-end code and you have back-end programming code attached to it. A lot of that type of code does not like spaces in it. Like if you think of like traditional programming like Java or Python or whatever, like your instructors are probably telling you don't put spaces in your variable names, right? Why? Because it breaks things. It doesn't work, right? Same thing happens on these servers. You unfortunately cannot count on the fact that spaces will work. They typically do, but only for static content. As soon as you have dynamic content, meaning there's database connections, back-end code, more advanced stuff going on. It's basically an app, not really a website. That stuff will break in the browser and it will break on the server just because there's spaces in it. So the convention, please don't put spaces in. All right, I do see that I have a question. Deshaun, if you want to unmute and ask the question, or if you want to type it into the chat, that's fine. I'm going to pause the recording for a second. So basically what Deshaun asked is, well, so far I've been putting spaces in my stuff, you know, and I think basically what you're saying is that a big deal. Up until this point, you know, I'm not really going to deduct any points or anything for it, right? So like you're learning, and that's kind of a natural part of the process. So if it's already out there and I've already graded it, I would leave it alone. If I haven't graded it yet, what I would suggest that you do is fix it both on your local machine and on the server, you know, re-upload it and resubmit it to Blackboard with the correct link. That would be my thing. Just so you get in that habit of not having the spaces in there. It doesn't really take that much time to fix, right? I mean, it's like right click, retype the name. And one thing, you know, I can give you as a tip, like if visually it helps you, because I know it happens for me, to have something that kind of looks like a space. So take a look at my screen right here, right? So I have this folder that I created, and on my local hard drive, it probably originally was named Web1 space, case space, study space, images space, and space media, right? But then I'm like, well, I'm uploading this to the server. So what I do, my convention, Deshaun, and this is a personal one, is I'm in the habit of putting a dash where I might put a space just so it makes it easier to read, right? And it doesn't, you know, that doesn't look too bad, right? But the web browser and the server will like it better with a dash over a space for whatever reason. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and I want to follow through with the example here, I have these pages. So I want to link to my index page and then submit that as homework, right? Here's a couple of tips I will tell you. When you are in the browser and you can get to the root of your account. So just to recall here, here's how you get to the root. You have https:// prometheus.gtc.edu. Now, when we're typing this in manually, you can usually just type this part. The other part auto-negotiates. So your browser's like, oh, it's HTTPS, let's just throw that in, right? But if you're giving me the whole link, it's got to include that, right? That will be followed by a /, then the squiggle thing and your username, and then a /. But to get to any of your other pages, what follows this / is your folder and file name setup. Exactly verbatim, upper, lower, case sensitive, space sensitive, whatever. But remember, if it's got a space in it, so this is why, you know, spaces are bad. So if it had a space in it, and let's say my folder name is web prog like this with a space in it, in the browser for that to work, I have to replace that with %20. Not very user friendly. It'll work, but not user friendly. All right. So this is why we prefer not to do it that way. If you are having a hard time remembering what your naming convention is, now I've done this for so long and so often, right? I'm really comfortable with how I do it. And I know that I would name mine web prog -fa 23, and then I had unit 2, and then I had project /, and I could optionally type in index.html, but remember this, without it, index.html automatically loads. Why did mine not load? What did I screw up here? Very intentionally, by the way. Let's see if somebody finds it. What did I screw up here? What's wrong with my URL? Well, mine's in my unit 2 project folder, right? So now watch what happens. Now my page loads up. Okay, but, okay, here's the big but. No joke intended. Well, maybe a little bit. Right? If you do find your stuff using FileZilla, like you know where it is in FileZilla, and you're like, okay, well, here's my index file for my HTML basics. You can use this little folder path right up here to help you build your path in the browser. So you could hypothetically select that so it all highlights, do a right-click copy, then come back over to your browser, type in Prometheus and all that stuff and your username, and then backslash, you don't want 2 slashes, here's why I did that, paste in that link, and then watch it load, right? Because FileZilla helps you build the path also. All right. If for any reason, and this happens a lot to people too, so I'm going to show you all the common mistakes. This file folder, right, that we're looking at right now, this is on my local hard drive, hypothetically. It's Google Drive, but it's locally addressed. If I were to open up this web page in the browser, and then I'm like, well, here's my link, right? And I want you to notice this. I'm clicking up here in the address bar in the browser, but I want you to notice right away, this is a file. See that right there? File. And then it says G drive, my drive. Here's an example of a space, %20 in my drive. And then it goes to my folder, whatever. Okay, so that works for you on your machine, right? So I've had a few people do this. So I want to show you what it looks like when I kind of get it on my end. Like if you're turning this in, right? And you come to this create submission and you paste in your link. Notice how this starts, right? So just by the fact that it's got file at the beginning, if you're sending me that, I don't have access to your computer. The only way that I could access that is if I was on your own hard drive. So if your link is starting with file, that's a local link, can't open it. I can. If you went to a different computer, you couldn't open it either. So that link really needs to look like this, wherever Blackboard is, right? So we would get rid of that link there, but it would look like this. Notice the other difference that happened. When I pasted in a live link with the HTTPS and everything, Blackboard turned it into a link automatically. However, and I'm saying this, a very big however, right? Even though this seemingly is the correct link, I often don't trust them. Because I've seen it where people, and maybe you guys have already experienced this, where you submit a link and then I grade it and I'm like, I can't get to your stuff. And you're like, but it worked. I swear to God, it worked, right? So you should make sure as a coder, and you will do this as a professional, by the way, if you're sending somebody a link, you want to make sure that link works. How do you test it? Well, you take that same thing you just copied and paste it into a new tab and see if it worked. Okay, there it worked. Better yet, right? Because you've already visited the page with your browser might not actually be showing you the latest copy. You are better off opening up a second browser, a different browser. If you're using Edge, open up Chrome. If you're using Chrome, open up Edge. If you're using Firefox, open up Chrome. If you're using Chrome, open up Firefox, etc., right? Or Safari if you're a Mac person. And inside Firefox, and of course that's on my third screen, which isn't here, so I'm going to do a new window that pops up here. I'm going to paste the link in here to test. So now it's working in Firefox too. Now I'm comfortable that the link is correct, right? So you think about this, if your grade moving forward is based upon the fact that your link works, you should double check that link, right? It's kind of like proofreading your paper before you hit submit. You know, you don't send in the first draft. You try that link, right? Once you're certain that the link works, then submit it. All right, so let's just play devil's advocate here. You submit it and the link doesn't work. Well, the other thing I want you to do, and this goes back to, now this is the zip file part, is in your folder, you'll want to create a zip of your stuff. Now, I've already done that, but basically how you do it is you can either go up one level and zip the whole folder, or go into the folder, highlight all the files you want to submit, and then right-click. Windows 11 should have it as a shortcut right on the short menu. If it doesn't, then you go to the old-fashioned Windows 10 style menu, where you choose compress zip folder. On a Mac, it should be an option click or control click, I think, or a right click if your mouse is set up for it, and you can compress the files right off of that. Right. Then that zip file should be added to your submission in the upload file area, not uploaded to to FileZilla or FTP. That just gets attached to your assignment, and that's my backup. So if your link doesn't work, I still have your stuff here so I can grade it. I'll downgrade you a little bit and ask you to fix the link, right? But I have something there to grade. I have your work. And then more importantly, I also have a backup for you of your project or your case study in progress. All right. Now, I know this is a lot to kind of wrap your head around, and maybe through the process of kind of covering all of this again, and I hope you guys are picking up on the fact that it's like, man, we already did all this, right? I hope you're saying that to yourself, because that means you were paying attention. However, and it's no shame to admit it, sometimes stuff doesn't work, or you forgot that one little thing, or you know what I mean? And this is to reinforce all of it, and also to create a guide that you could go back to, watch the video, and go, oh, that's what he means, right? And can you imagine if I had to write out all these instructions? It's better to see. Now, here's what I'm going to do next. I am going to pause the recording, open it up to questions, and if you guys are having problems with doing it, we're going to do it in class, right? And then if I think if it's a worthy example, I'll also record it into the video. All right, so